Hello, this is Suggested System 7, another Tiny Techno system in 62 HP. This is a much simpler system designed for making proper techno with the Gamechanger Plasma Voice at its heart. We're keeping things extremely simple, but making use of a multifunction voice in order to layer up more complex arrangements with a looper. So if you want to see an approach to the minimum viable party concept when it comes to making dance music, watch on, bub. So the star of today's show is the Gamechanger Plasma Voice. I don't know if you're aware that the game had indeed changed, but I'm informed reliably that it has. Gamechanger hired me to feature this very aggro module in something on the channel, and it was my idea to build this, a very simple mini techno system with this at its heart as a way of exploring what it can do. In this first 20 minutes, I'm going to explain the whole system, how it's wired up and why I chose all the modules I chose. And in the second 20 minutes, I'll show how I approach performing it. And as quick as I can, a bird's eye overview of what I have in here. Well, I've got the Plasma Voice as my one actual synth voice with the effects aid, applying effects to it. I'm driving it with the Music Thing modular Turing machine, which is supplying both the gates that trigger it and also the pitches that tell it what pitch to play at. But I'm using a Pico Quant from Erica Synths to quantize these voltages to a musical scale. I could, of course, use something like a BeatStep Pro or any number of modular sequencers as well, but as I've said before so many times, the reason I love this little fruity thing is that the Turing machine is just so insanely simple. You turn the dial to lock what it does, you turn the dial back to unlock what it does, and it spits out stepped voltages that are sequences. Could I do better by just squiggling a sequencer manually, randomly mostly, or should I just let chance decide it for me? The key thing about this approach is that this module has very few controls. There's only 4 things to interact with, all of which have a big impact on what is happening. So I can make a fast change very quickly. If you were using a BeatStep Pro, you would lose all that immediacy. However, you'd benefit from the fact that you could store presets. You would be able to have pre-made sequences that were maybe more musically satisfying. The set would be safer, potentially. However, it wouldn't be as improvised. So, it's a question of what you prefer, safety or improvisation. Now, the thing that the Plasma Voice is going to benefit from is modulation. I have a second Turing machine as my one modulation source, and I'm multing it, that is to say, I'm sending its output to multiples so that I get copies of that output, and I'm feeding it into various sound shaping parameters on my various modules. There are 5 inputs here on the Plasma Voice, and I've got this one step voltage from the Turing machine going into all 5. And you might say, wouldn't it be better if I had like 5 LFOs or something into here? And yes, maybe. Or 5 completely independent sample and hold modules, maybe. But the reality is, when we're talking about random voltage, does it really matter that they're all different? When on the inputs here, I have attenuverters, which allow me to adjust whether the voltage coming in affects this slider positively, that is, it virtually pushes it up, or negatively, it virtually pulls it down. And since I can go in 2 directions, that one voltage can push and pull these settings all by different degrees that I determine. So, in fact, actually just one modulation source, I feel like it kind of is enough. It's also really important not to overmodulate your voice to the point where you no longer are in control of it, because a huge part of what we'll play with is this grammar of techno and the fact that you want things to be satisfying. I'm using looping voltage sources because looping is such a critical part of what makes techno engaging and what makes what are otherwise completely abstract random burbles satisfying. But the problem being with things like filters, for example, if I push this, I could close it entirely on the next step, which would mean the voice would completely disappear. And that might be quite unsatisfying. We want to hear it each step, perhaps. And so a little modulation is perhaps what is in order here. A small but important module here is a clock divider. I have an adjustable clock divider clocking both of the Turing machines, and this allows me to run them faster or slower so that the modulation can be happening fast, but that the Turing machine that controls the pitch and the note occurrence is actually very slow. It allows me to have more sparse modulation or more sparse notes, or faster modulation and faster notes. If I just set a specific clock that never changed, I would never be able to adjust that as part of a set. And an important factor here is when you're looping, there's a lot of satisfaction in recording quite a fastly paced loop and then slowing the whole module down, slowing down the clock of the sequence, adjusting some timbral controls, and then recording a second layer that's slower than the first. It in fact uses the same notes from the first one, but because it's occurring slower, you get this kind of like fugue machine thing, this sort of idea that two sequences that have the same notes are overlaid over each other with different timings. It's a fun thing to play with, and by putting a adjustable clock divider that clocks our sequencer, then you make that possible. But you will need a looper. And then in terms of drums and mixing, well, I've got this proc drum here, which is just an amazing synthesized digital hi-hat module, and I've got this Nobular kickane, the questionably named kickane. It makes kick drums, but most importantly, it also allows you to feed your mix into it, which is what I'm doing here. I'm combining my looper with my hi-hats in this little Bastl Bestie, and then I'm sending it to the kickane. What it does is when the kick sounds, it ducks the audio that's coming into it against the kick. This is enormously important when we're making strange, sludgy techno. We're using effects, we're using full frequency range synth voices, and we're layering them up. We are not mixing a record in the luxury of our homes. We are literally, by the seat of our pants, smashing sounds together to try and make something interesting and engaging musically. And that would be fair to say that we're probably going to not mix it very well. So the kickane is taking care of the fact that the kick will not get lost in all that sludge. And to mention the hat again as an example, I've spec'd a hat here because it's, I think, just the one simplest other element that you could add to a kick and have a minimal viable party. Like just a hat, taking a cue from Surgeon and people of that ilk. Hats are just kind of it. They create that rhythm. You can create the offbeat hi-hat thing. If you could have one other thing, I think it makes sense. Of course, there's a billion things you could spec here, and you could have sample modules, and you could have like the samples too from Soundforce, which is amazing, and I have got that. And that's got 5 inputs, and you can put your own samples into it. But what I like about the proc is it's synthesized, so we can have short and long sounds actually adjust the timbrality of the sound. And in fact, I have some modulation from the Turing machine, which I can switch on by using this switched mult up here, this little 1U switched mult. What a switch mult lets me do is break connections on the fly or make connections on the fly. And here, for example, I've got it so that I can interrupt the signal that causes the kick to happen. So this is a kick mute. And here I've got some optional modulation. The Turing machine goes to either the hi-hats to control the length or the length of the plasma voice on a per step basis. I don't always want to have that happening, so it's an optional thing that I can click to make it happen. Switched mults let you optionally make patch connections on the fly. To sequence these drums, I've chosen the Tubatech 6-quincer, which is this little XOX style drum sequencer. Very cool, very sweet. It is not actually the kind of module I would ideally have in here. I'd rather have something with knobs where I can kind of, like the Turing machine, just turn them and make things happen. Things like the grids from Mutable Instruments is my favorite of all of these. The Euclidean circles is also a great option. Things where you can just turn the dials and more things happen are are very, very important. It's just that immediacy is so essential. However, if we sacrifice immediacy, I think it's worth having specificity. That is to say, I can program a very specific hi-hat pattern on this and get exactly that. I will not be going, dang it, what I really feel I need right now is the classic offbeat hi-hat pattern that you get in all kind of techno, and it just works so damn well because it creates that push-pull effect. Well, if I just want to program that, I actually can. Of course, it's 4 button presses. It's not the easiest thing to do in the heat of battle, especially if you only realize at the last second, you're like, oh God, we're about to go into a new set of 8 bars, and I really want that to happen. Well, it's tricky. So that's what I mean about the compromise with BeatStep Pros versus, you know, simple modules. You sacrifice immediacy in order to get exactly what you want. I think if you had a BeatStep Pro, it would be much bigger physically. It would be easier to get those things more quickly because there's more real estate to play with. Plus you can hit record and kind of bash the pads. Food for thought. And finally, in terms of mix, I've got this thing called the Endorphins Golden Master on the output here. The Golden Master is a modular version of a thing called a TC Finalizer, which is a very popular 90s sort of all-in-one mastering unit, quite notorious for those of you who were around in the 90s. We kind of remember the sort of love and hate that those things got, because of course it was a bit like, you know, the AI revolution. There's this sense that, oh, this little like one new rack is going to replace mastering engineers, which of course it isn't. But what is really powerful about what those racks do is, when used well, they're multi-band compressors and EQs, and they have the effect of kind of collecting and containing the sound and bringing things a bit more forward and stopping you from making any egregious volume mistakes in your set. And that's what a Golden Master is. It basically is a multi-band compressor, and it aims to kind of collect and pump up the sound a little bit, make it sound a bit more coherent and full. And what is very cool from a performance perspective for this application is there are band sort of killing buttons, and you can kill the low band. So you get this wonderful effect where you take all the bass away and then you bring all the bass back. I can mute my kick, of course, using my switched mult, but I can also push this button, and that will create the same kind of effect where you slightly hear the kick in the background, but all the bass is gone, so the energy is pulled out of it, as well as the bass and other elements. You bring it back. So it both kind of fixes and makes your sound better, and it also is a performance effect. So it's actually really cool. This Midronome module here is actually creating the clocks for me. Of course, you could use if you had a BeatStep Pro, that would be a good bridge between MIDI and clock, because the 505 doesn't have analog clock, and my system here doesn't have MIDI because I haven't got the MIDI module plugged into it. There is a MIDI expander, which I have, but I don't have space to put it in here. So if you're going to use something like an RC-505, you need some kind of way of sending both MIDI and analog clock from the same device. So that could be something like the Midronome, it could be something like the MIDI module here. There are like the CVOCD is another example. There's lots of the little gadgets that can do it. And then finally, the RC-505. I've made a video on loopers, which was in the previous one in this series, and I would urge you to watch that video if you want more of a kind of looper-focused exploration. Suffice to say, a looper, I think its power is that it allows you to use one voice like this and get so much out of it, because you can layer it over and over and over again and make it sound like that one voice is actually 5 or 10 voices. And there's another thing, which I think if you had this, then your job would just be so much easier, and that's a drum machine. If you just have a drum machine, suddenly you have so many more sounds that you can draw on, and you have a full drum backline. It depends what the machine is, of course, but things like the Roland TR8, things like the Electron Digitact, or Digitact, they are amazing for a reason. Like, you could build voices with the Plasma Voice, load them into the Digitact, and then use the Digitact side by side with this. And you wouldn't need, like, you know, the hats and other things. You may wish to use them if you have a way of interacting with them that you find more satisfying than hitting things on a drum pad on a, you know, drum machine. But from a pure cost perspective, drum machines are so much better value than doing this in modular. But as we'll see, the Gamechanger does have this useful ace up its sleeve. It has side chaining. But then again, so does the TR8. Still with me? Grief! It takes a while to explain this stuff, doesn't it? So then, Plasma Voice, and obviously, as I've said at the front of this, like I was hired to make a video about the Plasma Voice, and so I'm wanting to give this a try in something meaningful. I should quickly introduce it, and the things that I say about this Plasma Voice, if you were speccing something else, well, these are the things that that voice would also want to be able to do, which is the key things for me. It's a complete voice, so it makes complete sounds all by itself. It has an analog filter, but it has digital oscillators, and for me that's a critical aspect because I can just turn this dial. I've got 7 banks of different styles of sound and then 7 sounds within that bank. It's very quick to completely transform what the voice is doing from one moment to the next. And that immediacy is not something you would get from an analog voice unless you were very experienced or had put together a cluster of analog voices that you felt you could push into different places quickly and reliably, which will take a lot of practice. So if you, for example, had built like a 2 oscillator West Coast voice and you had a wave folder on the side and you had, other weird esoteric wave shaping and effects, then you could push those around and make them sound like different things. But it would take a lot of work. It would take a lot of futzing. Whereas on this, you just turn the dial, and by going to a bank, or if I leave it in the bank, by just turning this, I've got 7 different sounds. And a sound is actually like a kind of patch with its own qualities, a time parameter, modulation, a harmonic and flux parameter, all of which sculpt and change the tonality of the sound. And then we have an analog filter built in as well with its own little envelope. So actually you've got this complete synthy voice, but then it also has drum sounds and kind of noisy sounds, things that we could use to augment the hat and the kick and make it sound like we actually do have a drum backline. It has also an enormous amount of character, which may be a good thing or not depending on what you want. For example, as an obvious alternative, I would have to say the mutable instruments Platts is like my de facto most joyous alternative version of this. But a Platts is far more polite. If you wanted the kind of aggro sound of this with something like a Platts, which you'd never quite get because there's unique things to this is voicing, but you would need external distortion modules and drive things. This literally turns your sound into a lightning bolt and then sort of resamples it on the other end. So there's a lot of character to this. It really suits proper techno. Of course, there's like the quadranted swarm as well, a module that I've looked at before. And I also would cite pretty much everything that Noise Engineering have made, like the Manisoteratas Alia, this whole family, perhaps the Basimila Soteratas Alta, although this is that's more of a drum voice, really. This is more of a synth voice, but it also has drum sounds in it. So what I'm doing with the Plasma Voice, I hope you can transfer if you don't happen to own this, but I hope to also try and show you what this sounds like, and what it sounds like layered up, because that's what we're here for. And I really do just want to hear and try it for myself, because if it works, it might be something that I would choose to use. Well, that took a lot of explaining. Thank you for bearing with me, or if you skipped ahead, welcome. This is the bit where we're going to start actually making sounds, and I'll talk you through how I've patched this up. We'll look at how to play with it and what this little setup is capable of. All right, let's make some happy little technos. So I've hit start on my Midronome, which sends an analog clock to my modular and also a MIDI start message to the RC-505. You can see it started here. And then that clock feeds into my clock dividing module here so that I can slow or speed up modules in relation to 142 BPM. And I can change the tempo, but, techno. And so what we're actually listening to is the output of the RC-505. Let's turn up the input volume and hear the thing. Ooh. The way that the Plasma Voice works is you've got a digital voice, a sort of digital kind of sound, and then it runs it through a load of processes. There's like controls for the digital voice itself, and it runs through this tube. Pitches the pitch. So we can go up or down, or it's center detented. By adjusting the time, it time stretches an envelope that's built into the sound. So we can make it short or long. And then mod, harm, and flux are pitch modulation. With the mod, harmonic information. Oof. And then flux is chaos artifact. Just a bit of good old chaos. With the filter being a filter. You can hear that there's an envelope being applied to it, and that's what I mean about this being like a voice, an entire voice. There's a kind of complete sound that goes silent in a way that just a basic oscillator would not. Yeah. And then I can apply effects to it. Pretty much there, right? Add a kick. And then modes. We have 49 different modes, 7 banks of 7. 7 sevens of 49, right? If not, I'm in trouble. And this is bank 1, which are basses. It says here leads, plucks, drums, metal, static, sparks. Those are the names of the other banks. That's 1, 2. Woof, woof, woof. Let's program some hats and fade them in. So that's me engaging the Golden Masters band cut. The kick is still happening. You can hear it being pulsed out by the... And then I can be prepared to change the kick. And that's just the grammar of techno. Things happening on 8-bar changes. After 8 bars, something changes. That's kind of it. I don't make the rules. I'm here, just a messenger. But then there's this clutch. The clutch is a function where if you hold that down, I can change the sliders, but it won't make the change until I let go. Perfect. So if I hold the clutch, adjust the filter a bit, and adjust the flux a bit. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I increased the reverb on the kick as well, so there's a change with the kick after it dropped 2. So using the clutch is just very nice. I'm afraid I don't know another module that does it. So in terms of transferable knowledge, this is kind of unique to Plasma Voice. There's also a load more of the things that the Plasma Voice does. It has MIDI, there's like tons of other stuff, like menu-based stuff to like get way deeper. And I don't even think it's appropriate that I go massively into that in this video, because I just want to explain the kind of core principle. And then of course, modulation. So that's the thing. We know I've got a second Turing machine, and we know it's feeding via mults into this thing. And if I turn up these little controls, then it starts to modulate it. So because I've got filter and flux turned a little bit to the right, this is modulating them. with an all or nothing signal. But if I wiggle this up and down, we're going to get an interesting now 8-step. So now, by just futzing around, I found a nice setting, the flux being negatively modulated. And then let's clutch this. So I want to bring the pitch down. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's pretty off the hook, isn't it? And then of course we can adjust the black Turing machine that is adjusting the sequence, but we shouldn't do it mid-bar. I feel we still need to build this idea. That's the grammar of this thing. I'm feeling it. I know it just needs to build. And I can be thinking ahead of time, like, where am I going to take this? Like, where am I going to go? Like, after I've built this, like, to its max. Maybe I want to modulate that hat. So do you remember I've got my, like, switch mult in reserve? Just like that. I can make that connection. So now it goes slow, fast, and this one little hat sounds like open and closed hi-hat. And I might want to slightly adjust the timbral parameter just to hear it sounding getting more intense. Turn it up a bit. Get the kick even more. Fun. And that's just one voice with no looper. So let's now play around with the looper a little bit, and let's try and get a sort of multi-plasma voice thing going on. Alrighty. Oof. Let's now go through some of the sounds and see what else we can find. This is the lead bank. Sounds wicked with that effects aid on it, actually. So this is what I wanted, the drum. Let's increase the pitch. Let's speed this up. Let's have a 5-step. Nice. Let's record that. Okay, that's now recorded in this buffer. If I turn down the input signal and turn up this fader, now you're hearing the recording. So the Plasma Voice is completely free. I can pick a different sound, adjust the settings, and then try clocking this at a different rate. we should have something different. Let's fade it in. Record it. And then perform it as we're recording it. So we're still hearing the live plasma voice, but you know I've got it in reserve here. Break that connection so that we're not getting slow fast hats again. Just flick the modulation onto the hats again. Okay, we better get like some sort of bass thing. Oh yeah, I forgot it was live. Then let's fade in that recording. Oh, flippin' heck, it's getting quite busy, isn't it? Like that, friend. Missed it. That weird sound is coming off the plasma voice. I should have been recording. Gotta be faster. Start this. Okay, so this is muted. I want to now go back to basses. Just get like a nice sort of satisfying bass, and I think it wants to be quite quick. Not too high a sequence. Maybe an 8-stepper. And we'll reduce the pitch. So what I did just then was I flipped down the two elements we were hearing and I fade up that weird wacka wacka kind of sound. Then we can return to that phrase. Such a nice thing of using loopers is returning to that like original. Yeah, that's good. The downbeat wasn't quite where I thought it was, but that's all part of the fun. Oh yeah. So now we're hearing a live bass line, but I'm modulating the flux with Turing Machine 1. We have one recorded element that... Let's clutch it. Kind of good to go here. We can clutch it. And that's kind of it. This is the toy. This is the whole game. One thing that is flexible and can sound like lots of things being layered, and the respect of the grammar. Not making like crazy changes mid 8 bars, but waiting for that 8 bars. So it kind of makes sense to an audience and they kind of know what to expect. That's the game. Thank you to Gamechanger for changing the game. It's very interesting. Don't have anything quite like this. And it's got so many of its own weird little nooks and crannies. Because there's so many of these different modes to explore. Oh yeah, and then there is also the weirdest one of all, multi-CV. Which is where it changes the mode based on the CV. Which isn't weird at all. Ta-da! There's another Tiny Techno system which you may or may not have seen. I'll link it below, so if you want to see a completely other approach to making music with a small system, watch that video. All right, thank you.